What is DNS and how does it work? To understand DNS, first you need to understand how does the communication with the computer from one server to another server works. So DNS is required because humans don't remember an IP address. Like if you or me are asked to remember an IP address to reach a server, that won't be a feasible option. So that's why we have this system, whereas computer understand the IP address, we understand the domain name, that is actual name like facebook.com, google.com. And for converting these values, we use the domain name system. That is the main purpose of the DNS. Let's say for an example, we type www.google.com. When somebody types that in a browser, what actually happens? How does a computer know that it has to reach a Google server? Now, from a human perspective, it is very easy to understand, like it just go to the google.com. But for a computer, it only understands ones and zeros, so how it can go to a specific location to get the data? Now to get that data, first what it needs is an IP address. IPv4 is basically 4 octets. These are basically a numeric system for the computer. So each computer in the network will have a specific IP address, and based on these IP address, all the communications happen in the network. So we need to convert the www.google.com or google.com into a IP address. Now how do we do that? So first of all, whenever in the browser we enter this, it first sends a request to a DNS resolver. It is the responsibility of the DNS resolver to get a IP address for that specific name that I'm providing, that is currently it's google.com. So what it will do is like, it will first try to go to a root level domain server. There it will ask, hey, this is the domain namespace, how do I get the IP address? Then looking at the domain name server, what it does is that it looks at the URL in parts. So let's say you have google.com. At the end you can see there is a .com. So it will say, okay, I know that this is a .com, so it needs to go to a specific server. Or you need to ask somebody else to know like where exactly I can find that IP address. That specific server is called as the top level domain server. So when it reaches to the .com server, it then again asks, hey, I need to know what is the IP address of the google.com. So top level domain server will forward that request to the authoritative server. So authoritative server would be the last server responsible for returning the domain name. So all this recursive query that is happening would be done by the DNS resolver, and at the end of this recursion, it will get that specific data like what is the IP address, and that would be written by an authoritative server. Now the authoritative server will have like multiple entries for the DNS. To get the data back to the DNS resolver, it checks what kind of entries it had. So there are A records, they are basically an IPv4 records. So it is just a mapping between an IPv4 address to a domain name. So it will just return that specific IP address to the DNS resolver, and then DNS resolver will return that query back to client. One more thing can happen is like authoritative server can have a CNAME entry, that is a canonical entry, which signifies that this domain name is actually an alias for another name. So it can only have a mapping to a domain name to a domain name, or domain name to an alias. It cannot have a domain name to IP address map. Okay, this can be used basically when you have sub-level domains or a different alias for a same website. So it actually maps to the original root domain, and eventually the A record of that specific root domain name is searched and sent back to the DNS. So every time to perform these recursive queries to the different servers takes time. So whenever a browser requests it, first thing it checks whether it already have that record or the mapping inside its cache. So the caching can happen at multiple levels, at multiple places. So first I will tell you about the caching that happens in the browser itself. So browser itself will store the mapping of the IP address and the domain name, and it will also have a field like TDL, like time to live, like how much time that entry would be valid. Also there is another caching that is OS level caching, in way before the OS sends out the query outside its system, it first checks whether it already have the entries or not. There can be one more scenarios in which local system doesn't have any caching. So it goes to the DNS resolver. Now DNS resolver will check if it already has the A-name record. If it doesn't have the A-name records, it checks whether it has the NS record. NS record is basically a name server record that is the authoritative server record, where it can directly send the query to the name server, that is the authoritative server for the IP address, and the name server should return the IP address back to the DNS resolver. So I hope now you have a good understanding of how the DNS works, and I hope you like the video.